Hey there, everybody. It's great to have you back. In this lesson, we'll walk through an introduction to CICD. Now, what is CICD? Well, stick around and find out. But before we do talk about that, we'll quickly walk through an overview and some important things known as Big Bang development. And then we'll talk about continuous integration, which is the CI portion of CICD, and continuous delivery and continuous deployment, which are the two different options for CD within CICD. Okay, first things first, before we jump in and really break down what CI/CD is, let's have a chat about a common way that we might develop our solutions. So you might be a developer that has some code already in production and you want to go work on a new feature. Let's say it's some shopping cart functionality. Now, something that has become quite common when working with source control or version control systems is the use of branches. And what we can do is we can create branches for each of the features that we are developing. So let's say you've got this new branch for your shop feature, you work on it, you make some changes, and it lasts a really long time whilst you continue to develop that code. Eventually, you want to integrate that code back into your main branch. Now, if you've had that code out there for a really long time and you've made a lot of different changes, then I dare say it's going to be quite complex for you to merge that code back into the main branch. So this is just one thing we want to consider, and I want you to remember this as we move throughout this course. But we can actually take things to another level. You might have this scenario where you've developed a feature and you've integrated it back into your main branch, but what happens if at the same time you had another developer in your team that was working on a separate feature in a different branch? They might have created a range of different changes as well. Now, when this developer goes to integrate their changes back into the main production branch, you can imagine that's actually going to be even more complex than the shopping feature that was already developed, because not only have they made a lot of changes over a really long time, but some other changes have actually been introduced back into the main branch that might even conflict with the things that they are doing. So that merge is going to be a lot more complex. Okay, and it might take a long time to work through, to test, and to resolve any conflicts between the changes they've made, the main branch, and the new changes from the shopping feature as well. Now, we refer to this commonly as the Big Bang approach, or sometimes you might even hear it referred to as Git flow. It's this idea that you've got really long living branches that are being created for development for really big features. Now, it's called Big Bang because, once you've actually got that feature done, there's a Big Bang approach to getting it all merged back in and working with your main branch. And this is something that you probably don't want to do if you're working with CI/CD. But you'll come to appreciate why as we move throughout this lesson. Now, just to provide a little bit more detail on what actually happens when we integrate those branches, let's just focus on the ratings branch being integrated back into main. When this happens, before you actually integrate it, there's a few steps you're going to have to follow. Typically, what's going to happen is you'll build the code, you'll perform some unit tests and make sure all of the code is performing the different functions that it needs to as per the updates that you've made. Now, if everything hits the green light and is all working okay, you're going to perform that merge. Now, again, if we're following something like this Git flow or Big Bang approach, the actual merge process is going to be quite complicated. It's going to involve checking all of the different conflicts between files that might be modified between the two different branches. And it's just a lot of work if it's a branch that has been modified for a long time, or if there have been other features that you haven't synchronized back into this feature branch throughout the development. Now, what we're talking about right here is something that has traditionally been really complex and rarely manual. All right, and as we move throughout CI/CD, you'll see that this is something that we want to improve the performance of. Now, what we've been talking about so far is the manual approach to integration. If we use CI/CD, there are some ways that we can improve on this. But before we do take a look at how, let's have a look at the other part of the challenge, which is the delivery and the deployment. Now, traditionally, before using something like CI/CD, delivery and deployment are a set of manual tasks that we would need to go and perform. So you might say, for example, you've got your production application and you've got your users there ready to go. They're already connecting to that. They're using that system right now. But if you've gone ahead and integrated a new feature into your main branch, then you of course want to actually go and deploy those new features to your production environment for your end users. How do we do that normally? Well, manually, you'll have someone who goes ahead and stages the new solution. They set up some infrastructure. You can perform some acceptance tests and make sure that with everything in what could be a production environment, all the features and functions and integrations are working as expected. And once you are happy that this new solution is definitely production ready, you need to go and deploy it. Now, there's a range of different deployment strategies, but what we are really talking about here is ensuring that our users are actually using the new updated solution. So everything that we've spoken about so far are the different components involved in CICD, but what we've been talking about so far is performing these tasks manually, and it can take a lot of time. And even if you're using something like Agile or you're trying to follow DevOps best practices, if you haven't made any improvements in this area, then it can still be very slow. So even though you're developing code and you're making new features really rapidly, we of course need to make sure that we are delivering those features and deploying them to our production environment for the benefit of our users. So what is CI/CD? You can probably guess where we're going. Well, with CI/CD, we take a look at all of those different tasks that we've been completing manually, and instead of doing them manually, we try and automate them. For continuous integration, or CI, we are talking about that first component of the development of code, the unit tests to make sure that the code is functional, and the integration or the merging of that code back into our main repository. The idea here is that we want to continually and rapidly ensure that all of the changes that our developers are working on are constantly being included into our main development branch. And why do we do that? Well, we don't want to follow the Big Bang approach, because we know that that can introduce a lot of complexities and be really hard when it comes down to the time to actually merge that back in. Now, what does the CD portion mean? Well, there's actually two different components here. If you're talking about CI/CD using continuous delivery, then it means we are also automating the steps to have everything ready to deploy to our end users, but you're not automatically doing that. You're performing all these tests, you've merged your code back into the main line, you've got some solution that's ready to go, that's tested, that you're comfortable could be made available to your end users, but you haven't actually gone and automatically deployed that updated code to production. If you follow continuous deployment, on the other hand, then all of these tasks are automated, including actually publishing your code to your production systems. So this is the goal of CI/CD. The idea here is that we want to improve the speed and reduce the time that it takes to have that code that our developers work on actually deployed to production systems. So if we actually now just walk through what that might look like, well, with continuous integration, the first thing to understand is that we don't want to be using these really long-lived branches for our developers. Okay, so it's not just about using tools to automate the integration of code. It's actually a practice that your developers will have to follow to ensure the code that they are working on doesn't sit out in some long-lived branch for a really long time before it is merged back in, because we want to shorten those changes. We want to continually ensure that our main branch is always up to date. So if we have multiple different tasks, that's okay, but just make sure they are small, they don't sit out there forever, and they are continually being merged back into your main branch. Now that's one part of continuous integration. The other part is that, of course, we want to introduce some automation to actually help speed this process up even further. So rather than manually building, testing, and merging that code back in, you're going to use some automation to do so. Now, building and merging, you might consider to be quite easy to actually perform in an automated fashion. Okay, we can have a range of different command line tools for the various programming languages that we might be using to actually build our code, and similarly things like Git to actually easily go and automate merging of that code back into our main code branch. One thing that might not be as obvious is the fact that we can in fact automate testing as well. So through tools like Jenkins, Selenium, JUnit, and many more that are out there, open source or paid options available, to actually ensure that you are automating things like the unit test for your code to ensure that there are no issues before you actually go and merge that into your main branch. So that's the continuous integration component. Now, for continuous delivery and deployment, we can also rely on automated tools to help here. So we might say that we've got our production system and we already have our users talking to that production system. Well, once again, rather than just manually completing those steps, we want to use some form of automation to help out with all the tasks that we want to complete to actually get that solution up and online and in production. Now, we'll just call out here that there are different strategies you can employ to actually go and achieve this. One, for example, might be something referred to as rolling updates. With rolling updates, what we're doing is we're saying that after everything has been merged back into our main branch, we're going to get all of the artifacts ready to go. They're going to be compiled, and now we need to update our production systems. So you might actually go and update different nodes within your system so that, not all of your users are actually getting access to the updated code straight away. So you can use this as a slow release to further check if there are any issues that you need to be concerned with. Now, if everything's going okay, you can continually update those underlying nodes. Maybe you've got some containers, or maybe you've got some other form of host for your application. The key point here is that ultimately we'll want to update all of those so all of our users are accessing the updated application. Now, another strategy is one we've kind of touched on already so far, and that's referred to as blue-green deployments. And that's where we might run up an entirely separate system. And in fact, this can be quite handy because you can use that system as your staging environment. You can perform further tests yourself before you go and cut over your users to that system. But the idea of blue-green is that blue is our current production system. And once we're happy everything's ready with the updated system, we're going to cut over our users to that new system and know that if anything does go wrong, we can hopefully roll back to the blue or previous version of our solution if there are any issues. Now, one final thing I will just quickly touch on as well is that you might hear something referred to as feature flags. That's outside the scope of this lesson, but I did just want to mention it. If you're looking at what we're talking about right here, and you're saying, hey, it really sounds great, this idea of having small bits of code that we're constantly integrating and constantly pushing out to our production systems, but what if our users are not ready? We can automate all of this technical stuff, but maybe we need additional training, or maybe we need additional other processes that we need to follow from the human perspective. Well, if that's the case, you can still follow CICD, and what is commonly being done in the industry is the use of something referred to as feature flags. The idea here is that you can continually update your production system and make sure the code is sitting there ready to go. But what you can do is you can have configuration items in your code that allow you to go and turn on or turn off any of the new features that you have been building until you're actually ready for your users to use them. So everybody, that's been a high-level introduction of CI/CD. Once again, you can see what we're talking about here is the automation of manual processes. But more than that, it's also this idea of a mindset of ensuring that even if we've got the technology and the tools to improve how quickly we are deploying features, we're also updating our human processes to ensure that the tools are actually going to provide benefit. Because what you could actually end up doing is implementing CI/CD, but if the way that you are developing code means that it's sitting off there for a long time before it even comes back to that main branch, it's not really going to matter how much automation you try and implement with technology because your processes haven't been updated either. So folks, thanks for joining me. That's a wrap for another lesson. I'll see you in the next one.